Hello, global gardeners. It's Monday. It's great to see you here. And I have to correct myself, actually. It's not Monday for all of us. A shout out to Peter Stevens in Auckland, New Zealand, where it's actually Tuesday, about 5 a.m. in the morning. Great to have you here, Peter. That's fantastic. So not only do we cover the entire world as global gardeners, but we actually have some pretty interesting time zones that we're sharing as we talk gardening early in the week. So it's Monday for me. A shout out to Bowtie Life. Glad you could join us today. And coincidentally, I'm planning to talk about you at the end of the show today. So I hope you can stick around to the end. So fantastic to see everybody. I'd like to say thanks to Gilles Leger. I'm hoping that's somewhere close to your name, a new member of the Gardener Scott channel. And a reminder to you that at the training level that you signed up for, you get lots of good perks. There's perks at every level of the membership, but one includes an extra live stream, and they tend to be really small situations where we can do a lot of talking back and forth. And so at the training and the collaboration level on the channel membership, look for that in your community page on YouTube, because this Friday I'm actually planning on doing a members only live stream, and those are always a lot of fun. So nice to see everybody here, our wonderful moderators Jay and Heidi. And Bowtie Life actually asked a question. So who's in the throes of planning next year's garden? Well, I hope most, if not all of you, should already be thinking about planning next year's garden. And if you're not, now's a good time. And that's one reason why I wanted to discuss this as part of the show topic today. Garden catalogs, or gardening catalogs, depending on how you prefer to them, and how you can use this wonderful source of information to begin planning next year's garden. Now, for some of us, like Peter, you're probably in the throes of your springtime garden, and it's almost summer for you. So I hope that we can also share some of your information and your experiences. So jump into the comments. As I proceed, I'll show you some of my favorite catalogs that I've received over the years, and I'm just now starting to get the 2023 edition. But tell me what you think. If you get garden catalogs, what are some of your favorites? And particularly, if you would, go ahead and spell out why it's one of your favorites. So let me go ahead. I'll start with Baker Creek. This is one of those that is on the list of most people's favorites. Now, what makes Baker Creek a favorite catalog is the photography. It's the pictures. It's the colors of the plants that might be enhanced, might not, doesn't matter. They're beautiful. And so it's really a nice catalog to sit down with and just enjoy. So I like getting the Baker Creek catalog just as a reading source, usually in the early evening, sometimes in the morning as I'm drinking my tea. And it gives me ideas for some really interesting and rare plants that I could grow in my garden. So it's really the kind of catalog that I use just to get the creative juices flowing, just to start thinking about what I could do in my garden. Now I want to counter that with another one of my favorite catalogs. This is the Fedco catalog. Now this is last year's catalog. I don't have the 2023 yet. The difference being that Fedco is all printed in black and white. There aren't any colorful, pretty pictures, but it's packed with information about how to grow the plants. And once you've chosen the plant, what you can expect. And so I put these catalogs pretty much on separate ends of the catalog spectrum. You can get catalogs that are pretty and wonderful to look at, but may not be filled with a lot of information. And then you've got catalogs that are filled with information, but they may not be as pretty and colorful to look at. And so I've got a few others that I'll be talking about. What do you think about those catalogs? If you don't get the Baker Creek catalog, I suggest signing up for it. It's free. Fedco is a little more specialized. They tend to focus on, for me at least, I focus on the fruit bushes and the trees, but they have lots of other products. The key difference, I think, when you're looking at catalogs from the different perspectives is Baker Creek and a lot of the other colorful catalogs can show you what the flowers are going to look like and what the fruit is going to look like. And that's very important as we start planning our garden. When can we expect our harvest? Well, we can go to the picture in the catalog and say, it's supposed to be this color and this size. Good, now I can harvest. Whereas a catalog like Fedco, and R.H. Shumway tends to be the same way. It's also printed on newspaper paper, essentially, and it's got a lot of black and white. For those kind of catalogs, you kind of have to know what you want to grow, usually because you've grown it before, because someone's recommended it. And then you get a catalog like Fedco to learn more about how to grow it. So I think there's an important differentiation, and that's how I look at catalogs. Do I want to learn from the catalog as I move forward with my plants, or do I just want to get ideas for what to plant as I look at the catalog? At home with Cherie, I get the free Baker Creek and the whole seed catalog. Good for you. As a person new to growing food and flowers from seed, it helps to have photos. Absolutely. And that's one reason why I usually recommend Baker Creek as the catalog to get for new gardeners, because it is so beautifully done that it really can give you some good ideas, because they also have a lot of pictures with people holding the fruit or standing next to the plant, so you can get a good idea of the size and in the plant and the fruit and what you're looking for. So good, I'm glad you get that one. Shandy's Garden, I get both the free version of Baker Creek and actually pay for the full catalog as well. It's quite extended. And so I encourage free at every opportunity. And so most of the catalogs I get fall into that free category. Because of rising costs, a number of my favorite nurseries that I like to buy from no longer offer a hard copy. They've gone strictly digital. Digital is free as well. But Baker Creek, and I did a video when I toured the Baker Creek facility back in February and talked a little bit about it then, and when I talked with Jer, the owner of Baker Creek, and a lot of the staff, they have over 1,000 varieties of plants that they're growing for sale each year, the seeds that they're selling. And not all of those plants are going to be included in their free catalog. They also have a lot of other things, the backstories and how they do it. And so they have the extra large catalog that's much thicker and includes everything, but you have to pay for that. And there's a lot of other nurseries that have the pay to get kind of catalog. I don't do a lot of that just because I like to keep gardening as inexpensive as possible, but that is an option as you start exploring the ideas for the catalogs that you want to get. Coastal Crocus, high mowing seeds is pretty good too. Lots of great choices and arrives very early before I start to suffer winter garden withdrawal symptoms. That's a great point. And I love high mowing seeds. And every year, so the approach I take to gardening is to try to keep it as inexpensive as possible. But I also like to support the companies that I think are doing a good service, especially if they're sending out free catalogs. And high mowing seeds falls into that category. Now, they sell a lot of seeds that actually are targeted for my area. My Zone 5B Colorado garden matches a lot of what high mowing seeds sells. So I like to buy a few from them every year. But your point as to the garden withdrawal symptoms, that's why I wanted to talk about this today as well, because ordering catalogs and looking at the pictures of the plants and reading about what's going to happen with those plants in your garden is a great way to get away from that withdrawal and start thinking about what's going to happen. This is going to be a big catalog week for me, because starting tomorrow, my high temperatures for the rest of the week are going to be below freezing. I'm not going to see temperatures above freezing for at least a week. And so while last week I encouraged you to get out into your garden, this is one of those weeks where I'm not going to be spending much time in my sub-freezing conditions. And so it's nice to sit in the warm house in my comfy chair and peruse the nice catalogs as I try to figure out what I'm going to do for the next season. So Tugal says, love high mowing. It's a local business for me, and I love to supplement local if I can. Good for you. And there are actually quite a few catalogs from Vermont and Maine. Fedco falls into that category that I have had really good success with. And so if you can find one of these seed companies that's giving out the free catalogs and they happen to be near you and you can go to their store and buy, do it. Still get the catalog because it helps to have some ideas sometimes before you wander into the store. But also just wander into the store and start buying. I'm planning a trip to Oregon to see my daughter and my new granddaughter in the months ahead, maybe in February or March. And I'm planning a visit down to Territorial Seed, one of my favorite. Another one of those catalogs that's not very flashy, but it's got great information, and I love their seeds. So whenever I can get to one of those companies that I like to do business with, even if they're someplace else, it becomes a holiday, a little bit of a vacation trip to go buy seeds someplace in person rather than always doing it online. So looks like In the Garden with Eli and Kate might be on with us today. I see Jay putting a link. So nice to have you here as well. They just got some snow in Scotland. You can check out their recent video with some really good ideas about protecting your plants and what happens when the weather changes. So always nice to see you here. And shout out to Yankee Sister Homestead as well in Connecticut. So always nice. Alan Taggart's checking in from Northern Ireland. Nice to have you here as well, though it's afternoon for you. Some of us are just starting our day out. So tell me about your catalogs. What kind of catalogs do you all like to peruse? Do you like the pictures and just look at it as entertainment? Nothing wrong with that. I did that for years. Or do you actually start bringing the catalogs into your garden planning ideas? Now, I have some videos, and I've been doing these videos for years. I've got probably half a dozen or a dozen videos on ideas for how you can start planning your garden. But I like to take the catalogs and make them an active part of my garden plan. So as you're figuring out your plan, and as Bowtie Life was wondering, I think we should all be doing this. Even in Auckland, New Zealand, during springtime moving into summer, it's still one of these activities I think we should all look at. I'm looking at this from a how do I get my spring garden started? In Australia and New Zealand, you should probably be thinking about your fall garden. After your summer plants are fading, what are you going to plant going into autumn? And so that's why I think this is a periodic review that we should all be doing on a regular basis, whether it's almost winter for us or maybe almost summer for someone else. Plan. What's the next season going to look like? And the catalogs are a great way to begin, in many cases, that process of what am I going to grow? Now, I know that I'm going to be growing tomatoes and peppers and squash and some leafy vegetables and probably some beets. Those are top on my list. Well, every year I like to try something new. So when it comes to beets, what beets am I going to grow? I know I'm going to grow beets, so they're on my list. That's where the catalogs come in. I can start going through the catalogs to choose beet seeds. And so a couple years ago, I did that and chose the Kyoga beet seed, and it gives a beet that is red and white inside. And it was great. Now, it wasn't my favorite beet that I've ever grown, but I chose to grow that purely because I knew I wanted to grow beets. I was looking through the catalog. I came through that, or I saw that particular variety and thought I would give it a try. I tried it. It was okay, but I put it on the back burner. I may or may not grow again. Same thing. I've always grown the Detroit dark red beet, but then I discovered the golden beet. Started growing golden beet. That's now number one on my list. I wasn't that familiar with golden beets until I started looking through the catalogs and recognized that as a new variety that I'd never tried before. And so that's one of those things that you could start maybe shifting your focus. Look through a catalog like Baker Creek for the entertainment, for the pictures, but then use it as an idea. Oh, hey, here's a bean that I'd never thought about growing before. Maybe I'll try it next year. Carrots are a regular in most of our gardens. Last year, from Baker Creek, I got the Kyoto red carrot. Now, the Kyoto red carrot is different than most of the carrots. Most of the carrots will start them from seed in spring and then harvest in summer, generally speaking. Whereas the Kyoto red specifically says don't grow it in spring. And so I tried growing it this year and I couldn't quite figure out the timing. It sprouted, it got cold, and the plants didn't do that well. I'm going to try again next year because this is one of those that's a more challenging type of carrot plant. It may not do well in my area because our winters just come on so strong so quickly. And after a second try, maybe Kyoto red just isn't destined to be part of my garden. But I'm willing to give it a try because I saw it in a catalog and it was something that I thought would be interesting. I love my purple carrots. I love my orange carrots. Might as well try a red carrot. I would have never known about it if I hadn't got the Baker Creek catalog and started looking through it and deciding what I wanted to do. Bettina, nice to see you here. Talking to Jay, West Coast seeds are terrific. Great service, friendly, professional staff. I've heard from a few others about West Coast seeds. I actually haven't ordered from West Coast seeds, so I'll have to give them a chance one of these days. I'm always looking to try out new businesses, try new seeds with new plants. Janny's saying the yellow beets are really delicious, but the white beets I don't like. Yeah, and I think that's one reason why the Kyoga is a beet that I wasn't thrilled with, because it was red and white, and I think the white part of it was probably not as flavorful, and so the whole beet wasn't as flavorful. So yeah, I would agree with you. The white aren't high on the list of flavor. The reds, of course, and the yellows definitely are the ones that are the ones that I like to focus on. Urban Chicken Mama says, I like the picks. They help me try new things to grow, like the yellow cauliflower I saw this morning from Johnny's Selected Seeds. And Johnny's is another great company. I love Johnny's catalog. It tends to be so you have the thin catalogs, you have the small catalogs, and then you have the big, thick catalogs. And Johnny's is one of those big, thick catalogs that is not only packed with things that you can get, but also has some great information. There's some really good, especially as a new gardener, I think catalogs can be a great learning source of how to garden. And Johnny's is one of those catalogs that's packed with good information on how to garden, generally and specifically. Johnny's will have articles on how to grow a type of crop, but then there's good information about the specific varieties that might have differences in how to grow them. So yeah, I like Johnny's. That's definitely one of those things that I would put into my mailbox. Order the Johnny's. Jay saying, carrots. I recently harvested 3 bushels of sorted carrots. I protected them about 8 weeks past the season with homemade tunnels. Good for you, Jay. And that's one of the things that in the garden with Eli and Kate we're talking about is using the homemade tunnels to help extend your season and protect your plants a little bit. So great idea. Absolutely great idea. Hi, Pat. Thank you so much for that super chat contribution. I appreciate it. Seed Savers Exchange mission is impressive to me, and I get their catalog. I think Seed Savers Exchange is a fantastic organization. I completely agree with you. Their mission of saving those heirloom varieties that might be lost if we don't find a way to put them into our garden. I love that. I'm a member of the Seed Savers Exchange. I get their catalog. This is a nice big thick catalog, and I try to order from them every year as well. And the catalog is one of those good ones with a ton of information, some great pictures, and the support of that organization is something I would encourage gardeners to do, at least in the U.S. Support that project. And there projects like that are starting to pop up all the way around the world where we recognize that plants that our parents and our grandparents grew are being lost. They're no longer being grown anywhere. I saw some numbers, and these aren't the exact numbers, but something along the lines of I think it might have been talking about carrots, and how 100 years ago it was estimated that there were like 4 dozen different types of carrots being grown in the United States. And now that number is down to the most popular ones, less than a dozen that are actively being sold by the big seed companies in springtime. So I just think that's kind of sad, because a lot of those varieties are great. They're just not popular, not being sold. And the seed companies are focused on a lot of the other ones. Seed Savers Exchange looks at it completely differently and really tries to get some of those old heirloom varieties. So thank you for bringing that up, Pat, because as you saw, I've got the catalog and they were on my list. Donna Hall, thank you for that super sticker contribution. I appreciate it. Nice to have you here. Thank you for helping to support the channel. That's wonderful. Okay, so I'm scrolling down again to see Bohemian Herbology says Seed Savers has $25 memberships right now. Oh, awesome. I think, and so as a gardener, you can definitely get a membership for yourself, or you can ask for a membership from your family for the holidays, or you can give memberships to Seed Savers Exchange. So great idea. This is a good time of year. And it was about a year ago, I think, that I actually got my membership, kind of thinking along those same lines that I would treat myself to a membership with Seed Savers Exchange. So always a good idea. Gardens Happen says, my favorite carrot so far is Cosmic Purple. And I agree with you. I love Cosmic Purple. And I talk about that in a video this last year where I did my purple garden and for my granddaughters. And we grew the purple carrots. I love the Cosmic Purple. The only issue I have with Cosmic Purple is that Mala likes Cosmic Purple carrots too. And so this last year, after the harvest of my Cosmic Purple carrots, I thought I got them all, but if you've grown carrots before, there's always some that get left behind in the ground. And Mala actually discovered that she could dig up that bed and pull out some of those carrots that were left behind. So she got one of the Cosmic Purple carrots and brought it into the house and started chewing on it. And I now have some purple stains on my carpet. I've tried getting it out. They don't come out very quickly. So the Cosmic Purple can stain if you're not careful, but it's a delicious carrot. It's a beautiful carrot. And I actually like to have it roasted with some of my beets. So one of my favorite meals, I've said this before, to fix, or side dishes, I guess it is I'll roast my beets and my carrots and my potatoes all from my garden together with a little bit of garlic and onions from my garden. And that's a fantastic, easy dish to make. The roasted vegetables like that is just wonderful. So yeah, thank you for pointing out the cosmic purple carrot, because I agree, it is one of those that is really good to do. Donna Hall says, just ordered Baker Creek survival kit of 100 variety of seeds. Only my second year of gardening. Good for you. And so I'm planning to talk about this in the months ahead in a video, because a lot more seed companies are starting to offer the big kits, the packages of seeds. And so I have some of my videos I did this year about survival gardening, and I highlighted from survival gardens or survival garden seeds. And it's wonderful to get 100 packets of seed, or I think the one I got, it was 150 packets, I think. That's great. However, you might not be able to put all of those seeds into your garden in the same year. Recognize that most of the seeds, almost all of the seeds that we're buying from these seed companies, can be saved for following years. So in your second year, you suddenly have 100 packets of seeds, and you suddenly realize that you can't plant them all. Save them for following years. And this ties in with the planning as well. I'm often planning beyond this next season, because I'll look at something like that from Survival Garden Seeds, for instance, and get that big bucket. And I recognize that I'm not going to be able to plant all of them this year. But when they give me in that box a selection of different types of squashes, for instance, there might be 6 or 8 different type of squash seeds. Well, I can plan that this year I'll grow 2 or 3 different varieties, save the seeds that I haven't opened yet, and next year I'll grow 2 or 3 different varieties. And that's what I did specifically with the survival garden seeds this year. In the squash, I've got more squash to grow next year that I haven't tried yet, but this year I grew delicata squash, which I'd never grown before. Delicious, fantastic. And so it's now high on my list of squash seeds that I'm going to grow, because I decided to get a selection of seeds with a whole bunch of varieties I'd never tried before, and you can spread it out over a couple years. So the big packages like that of a lot of seeds are going to be more expensive than if you bought just a couple packets. Generally, you'll save money than if you bought 100 seeds packets individually, but spread it out over a couple years. Go ahead and plan to get one of those big buckets, and there's 2 or 3 years worth of seeds for your garden. So maybe one big expenditure in the beginning, and then next year you really don't need to worry too much about it. Coastal crocus for second year seed, need to know which will keep. Onions and parsnip, for instance, lose huge amounts of germination, and that's a good point. I've got a video, no doubt Jay will give you a link to it here soon, on how long you can expect the seeds to last. I did that earlier this year, and I do a breakdown of the different seeds based on how long they're going to last. And always on the lists, onions are going to be the shortest lifespan or viability of the seeds. Onions generally are said you only last a year. You need to get those onion seeds in the ground, if not this year, then next year at the latest. In practice, I found that the second year I still get some pretty good germination, but I agree with you. Yes, the onions and the parsnips are very short-lived, and you can only use them with good viability in the first or second year. Most seeds, you can expect to last at least 3 to 4 years. And then there are seeds like tomatoes and peppers, for instance, that 5, 6, 7 years easily. And so check out that video, because in that video I actually have some pepper seeds that are about 10 years old, and they germinate and actually started growing them. Now, for the video, they didn't all germinate, but after I made the video, they just took longer to germinate. And so I'd already released the video saying that the germination rates weren't as good as I had hoped, but ultimately almost all of those 10-year-old pepper seeds germinated. So there are a lot of seeds. If you store them in a nice, cool, dark, dry location that can last longer than is usually advised. So in general, onion seeds are on the short side of the longevity scale. Most of the plants are in that 3 to 4 range, and surprisingly, there's quite a few plants that the seeds can last longer than 5 years. And so, especially, and I, I think this is just my own theory. The seeds you save will last longer. I think if you are looking at how seeds are collected and then packaged and then sold, and I talk a little bit about that in that trip to Baker Creek, but they're collecting seeds from all over the world. It's actually not all grown at Baker Creek, though they do have some grown in Baker Creek. And so a lot of the seeds that they're subcontracting for are being collected throughout the year and packaged throughout the year. Then they're being labeled and sold for the following year. And so by the time you get a package of seeds from some of these big seed companies, that seed is probably already at least a year, probably closer to a year and a half old before you're putting it into the ground. Whereas if you save your own seed at the end of the season, the next year you're putting it into the ground and that seed may only be 6 months old. And so by saving your own seed, essentially, my theory is that it's at least 1 year younger than any of the seed that you can buy. And I think that may be why when I've saved onion seeds before and they've lasted for 2 years, I think that's a big reason for it, because the onion seed I'm buying is already old by the time I put it into the ground. It's lost a whole year of viability, so it's only going to last 1 year. Whereas if I grow onions and let them go to seed and then save that seed, I can use it for at least 2 years. So what do you think about that theory? Have you seen similar results? That's kind of the direction I tend to head as far as saving my own seed and expecting them to last longer. Carrot seeds the same way. Carrots generally are expected to last about 3 years. Carrot seeds that I have saved myself have germinated very well at the 4 and 5 year point. And I think it's because I've saved a year from what the commercial producers actually give to us. So some general thoughts on that. Urban Chicken wondering, why do some companies put a red or pink coating on the seeds? That's not a good thing. So a lot of times the coated seeds, and I've used the coated seeds before. Usually it's a clay material that they'll use. So once you put it into the ground, it dissipates very quickly. It really doesn't interfere with the seed. But Fairy Morse Seed Company does a lot of this. For very small seeds, a lot of these companies will coat the seeds so that you actually see the seed. And so carrots, for instance, are a very small seed. And if you want to sow your carrot seeds, you have to sow as closely as you can to the correct spacing. But because it's such a small seed, it doesn't always work out real well. And so when they germinate, you have to come back and thin out the carrots. So to get 12 carrot plants growing, you might have to sow 30 carrot seeds just because it's so difficult to get the right spacing. A coated seed, especially if it's a color like a red or pink, and often they'll vary with greens and blues just to differentiate the seed. But you can see the seed and put it into the ground at the exact spacing you want. So if you use a coated carrot seed and you want to grow 12 plants, you only have to use 12 seeds because it's much easier to sow by being able to see the seed, and they're not so tiny. That coating helps make it into a larger size that you can actually plant easier. So that's the primary reason, as I understand it, is for sowing to be easier, to make a small seed bigger and to make a seed that might not be as easy to see easier to see, so that you don't waste seed through the process of thinning them out or pricking them out because you just have too many seeds in a particular space. And then I think there's also just an aesthetic part to it, which is why like Fairy Morris has so many different colors in their coated seeds, so that you know exactly what it is based on the color of seed as to the type of plant that you're growing. I think that's a lesser reason. I think it's really more for the sowing and making the sowing a little bit easier. But from what I've seen, and I tried to look into this a number of years ago, that coating, because it's generally a clay and inert substance, it really doesn't interfere with the germination. And so it really isn't anything to worry about. Now, there are some companies that I've seen that I'm not that familiar with because I don't usually do business with them, that might coat the seed with an antifungal or antibacterial coating. And some of those are much more specialized because they're being sold to regions that might have a particular problem. So they coat the seed with a chemical to prevent some of the potential disease issues that might show up where that seed is being grown. But I've never used any of those, and so I can't give you any personal experience on that. At Home with Cherie, can you share your thoughts on saving cucumber, squash, melon seeds? I didn't this year, but want to start, but keep hearing about cross-pollination. Good question. And actually, I've been laying out the outline for a video on this. I'm planning on doing a video. It's actually, as I got it outlined right now, going to take a long time to shoot as I'm thinking about it. But it's going to talk about this subject. I have no problems saving my cucumber and squash and melon seeds because the way I do it, I do everything I can to avoid cross-pollination. And so let's talk about the delicata squash, for instance. The delicata squash, I'm now going to grow again, and I want to save seed. This was my first year of growing it. I didn't save the seed because I didn't know what to expect. I still have some seeds from that packet that I'll put into the ground for next year because I'm saving them. And next year, I'll grow delicata squash for the purpose of saving the seeds. I also grow yellow squash and zucchini and pumpkins in my garden, all of which could cross-pollinate that delicata seed. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a couple things, and this is what I'm going to be showing in the video when I get it made. The first is I'll start my delicata squash seeds indoors about 3 or 4 weeks before I'm planning to put them outside. So by the time I put them outside, the plant is already a month old. Most of the time when I plant my squash, I direct sow the seeds in the ground. So even though my season is short, it's still plenty long enough for the squash seeds. So the delicata squash seeds are going to be the first plants in the ground. And then I'm going to put all the rest of the seeds in the ground. Now, because those plants are already a month old, they're going to start flowering before, probably at least a month before, all the rest of my squash flowers. And so I don't have to worry about cross-pollination. I'm still growing 3 or 4 different types of squashes, but because I've staggered the size of the plant at planting, the bigger plant is going to flower first. The only pollination that's going to happen is going to be from delicata flower to delicata flower. Then when those squash grow, and this is the important piece, I'm going to harvest the very first fruits, those first delicata squashes, and those are the ones I'm going to save the seeds from. Because as the season progresses, and as those yellow squashes and as those pumpkins start flowering, the delicata is probably going to still be putting out more flowers. Well, those later flowers are more likely to be cross-pollinated by one of these other types of squashes. The first fruit won't be cross-pollinated. So that's why I'm saving those seeds. I will not save the delicata squash later in the season for the purpose of seeds because I'm almost certain those have been cross-pollinated. So it's all about the timing of the planting and the sowing, the timing of the flowers, and the timing of the harvest. when it comes to which of the ones are going to be the seeds you're going to save. And then another aspect when it comes to saving seeds is covering the plants. And so I'll also be talking about that in that video. Basically, you use like a row cover, a fabric that covers the entire plant so that insects can't get in to cross-pollinate. What you have to do at that point is to hand pollinate. Now I've got a video on hand pollination. What you do is you cover your plants so that they can't physically be cross-pollinated because no insects are getting to them. And then every morning you come out and you take some of the male pollen and put it onto the female flowers and you'll get your fruit. You can save the seeds from that fruit because you pollinated those plants with the specific variety you're trying to get. The insects didn't pollinate those plants and lead to the problems of cross-pollination. So those are my thoughts. And so when I want to save the cucumber seeds in particular, and I actually did talk about this in a video this year, I do the same thing. I will start one type of cucumber. And so this last year, Boston pickling cucumbers, for instance, all I started were Boston pickling cucumbers. And for about a month, that's all I grew was Boston pickling cucumbers. Then a month later, I then started putting in different types of cucumbers, like the Marketmore 76. Because those first seeds were growing and became plants, they flowered first. And so I was harvesting Boston pickling cucumbers at about the time that my Marketmore cucumbers were just starting to flower. Well, the fruit that was on that plant had been pollinated weeks before. And so I saved a whole bunch of Boston pickling cucumber seed this year because I knew those cucumbers had not been cross-pollinated because there were no other cucumber plants to pollinate them. So it's as simple as that. I mean, it takes planning and it takes the timing awareness, but it's easy to do. You just have to take those couple extra steps. And there's Jay right on top of things with the link for that hand pollinating squash video. Thank you so much for that, Jay. I appreciate you being on top of things. So let's see. Want to check out something. Still looking for what you guys think are good catalogs that you'd like to recommend. There's Britt saying, I learned from your cross-pollination video that I most likely saved hybrid melon and squash seeds now from growing so close together, but now I know. And you can still plant those seeds. There's nothing wrong with growing a cross-pollinated seed. In fact, sometimes you can really discover some cool stuff, and I know some of you do this, where you have those melons and squashes and you suspect they're being pollinated. Go ahead and save the seed and plant them. You might surprise yourself at what will actually grow, because sometimes it can actually be kind of cool. Rudimental gardening tried broccolini this fall for the first time. Just now getting some florets ready for harvest. Yummy. Good for you. Thought it might give better yield than standard broccoli. And I've seen that. I've had better success with broccolini varieties for me here in Colorado than the standard broccoli. So I'm still trying to search the best varieties because I haven't had real good luck with a lot of those big florets that are growing on a lot of the standard broccolis that people grow. But whatever works, I think, is what you need to be looking for, and that's the kind of thing. There you go. Rachel says, I have gotten seeds with antifungal coatings in my area, specifically pea seeds. Okay, there you go. And so I'm not aware that they've really caused many problems, but I'm glad you're doing it. Hopefully it has worked for you as well. So scrolling down to catch up with what's happening with the questions. And thanks, Shanky Sister. I appreciate that comment. So, okay, looks like Bohemian Herbology is wondering, is there anything more fun to talk about than miraculous plants? It's hard. There might be something that's more enjoyable to talk about, but when it comes to plants, I think that is definitely some of the fun things to talk about. And so I've mentioned this in the past with my tomatoes. I discovered a couple tomato plants almost 5 years ago now when I was at the Galileo Garden, and that looked like to be genetic mutations. That year, I grew over 2,000 tomato plants, and two of them were distinctly different than others. And so, because of the genetic changes in those particular plants, and I could tell because of the leaves, I've been saving seeds and growing those seeds and saving seeds and growing those seeds for about 5 years now. And the resulting tomato is just fabulous. My Galileo Moon is one of them, and I'm working on the other one as well. And so if you come across something like that, in this case, it wasn't due to a hybrid being developed. It was because of a mutation that I recognized because I was growing so many plants. But if you have cross-pollination and a hybrid develops, go ahead and plant that seed, because you may come across something that is really, really cool. The key point to recognize, and that's why I'm taking years on these tomato plants in particular, is that first generation, that F1 seed that you have created, may not be stable. And so save the seed from that hybrid melon or squash or whatever it happens to be, and plant it again the next year and see if you can replicate the fruit, and then save some of those seeds for the ones that you really like. And over a period of years, and generally we're talking 5 to 7 years, after 5 to 7 years of doing this, you should be able to have stabilized the genetic traits of that particular plant, assuming that it's not being allowed to cross-pollinate within that time period. If you're able to keep the seed pure, it starts as a hybrid, but if you can keep it as pure as possible, over time you can stabilize the genetics of these fruits that you're growing, and you may create an entirely new melon or squash or cucumber or whatever it happens to be. So if you really want to have fun with gardening, start thinking about that kind of stuff, because it really can be enjoyable when you discover something new in your garden that no one else has ever seen. And cross-pollination is a great way for it to happen. Hi, Karen in Thunder Bay, Canada. My apple seedlings are about 6 to 8 inches tall and are still growing. Awesome. One has leaves and one has lost its leaves and has spring buds. When should I plant? And so I'm attempting to do the same thing with some apple seeds and with some peach seeds. And I think I may have talked about this in the weeks past, but here's my general approach. At Thunder Bay gets really, really cold in the winter, as you well know, with a lot of snow. And so over the course of the last couple years, as I've been trying to grow some new tree seedlings, and I've taken some cuttings and potted them up, for me, and probably for you with our severe winters, what I found is that those first year potted plants don't survive the winters very well outside. And so I think it would be better to have a 2-year-old plant, or maybe even ideally a 3-year-old plant, before you put it into the ground permanently so that it would survive your winters. In the wild, sure, apple seeds will fall and sprout and they'll grow. But what we don't often think about is when you have a wild tree growing, or an apple tree growing in some field, and 100 years later you come back and there's more trees. Think of the thousands and thousands of apple seeds that have spread in that area and sprouted and then didn't survive. So we may see trees in the wild that spread, but there are hundreds, if not thousands, of seeds that didn't survive. And that's what I've discovered in my areas, is I'll have 5 potted trees and try to have them survive my winter in that first year. And if I'm lucky, one of those trees survives my winter outdoors. If I put it in a protected spot, those same 5 trees, instead of being exposed to the extreme cold and the extreme weather, if they're in a protected area, still allowed to go dormant, and then put back outside in the next year, at the end of the second year, if I leave those outside, I can expect 2 or 3 of them to survive. So it depends on how many trees you're trying to grow, because you can expect that there's going to be losses in that first and second year purely because of the weather and the cold. If you want to bring them in to a protected area and have them survive the winter, and if you can keep them in a pot for 2 or 3 years before you put them in the ground, you're going to have even more success and more likelihood that that plant's going to survive into the future. So I hope that helps. That's my thoughts as far as the planting. At the 6 to 8 inch tall point, that's a minimum. And like some of the yew plants that I was trying to grow this last year, I put them in the ground at about the 6 inch point, and none of them survived through the winter. I would say that is a minimum. You know, a lot of the apple trees that you're going to be growing from a nursery, they're already in the 2 to 3 foot size before they are even willing to sell them in many cases. And so just be careful about that. Now, that being said, I did get some fig trees, some Canada fig trees this year from Baker Creek, and they're super hardy, and I put them in the ground in my greenhouse to grow, and we'll see if they survive the winter. They were in that 6 to 8 inch category, did great over the summer. I'm kind of rolling the dice to see if both of my fig trees are going to survive my cold temperatures in the greenhouse this winter. So keep your fingers crossed. If you can keep it in the pot and allow those trees to get bigger, you can expect to have more success when you ultimately do put it into the ground. Shandy's Garden, when trying to stabilize a hybrid, is it necessarily any better to always grow as a direct sow for stronger plants and acclimation? Of course, ensuring no cross-pollination, like you said. So I wouldn't, it depends on the plant. And so for the type of plants that we're talking about, the squashes and the melons and the cucumbers, all of them tend to do better with direct sowing. While you can transplant the squashes and the melons and the cucumbers, I find that they grow better, they grow faster, and they grow stronger through direct sowing. So kind of to your point for the stronger plants and acclimating them to the environment you have, I would prefer to direct sow the plants as much as possible. So that's just how I garden and just how what I find with my experience. And so, yes, as long as you can keep the cross-pollination from being a problem, and direct sowing also allows me to do that. I'll have my hoops and cover them with row fabric and sow the seeds underneath, and I don't have to worry about the insects either eating the plants or having those cross-pollination issues. And in most cases, I'm direct sowing those seeds. It's only, like I mentioned earlier, if I want to get a head start on the season, that I might grow the plants indoors when I'm planning on doing a whole bunch of different varieties. I also focus. If I'm trying to grow a plant for the purpose of collecting a lot of seeds, I may not grow another one of those type of plants. I've done that with cucumbers before, where I wanted to save a bunch of cucumber seeds, like from the Market More variety. That's the only variety I grew that year, period. So rather than taking all of these steps to try to protect it from cross-pollination and figuring out the timing for harvesting the fruit, if you only grow one type of cucumber, you can save all of those seeds and they'll be fine. No cross-pollination issues at all. The same with squashes or melons. Just grow one type. This really works well if you're a new gardener and you have a small garden space. Just grow one type of open pollinated plant and then save the seeds. And there's zero issues of cross-pollination if you're not growing something that could cross-pollinate it. So that's really a nice way to do it. In the Garden with Eli and Kate, happy afternoon to you in Scotland. Do you think your preference for direct sowing might change as you have more time experience growing with your new greenhouse? Great question. And so it's a great question because I know you. And so check if you haven't checked out In the Garden with Eli and Kate, great information about growing in a greenhouse, because their greenhouse in Scotland is ideal for growing some incredible, you should see their video on peppers as they grow different peppers using a couple different methods, and then check out to see which methods are great in the greenhouse. Fantastic information about greenhouse growing. So yes, as I do more growing in the greenhouse, it will probably affect how I do growing. When I was growing in the big greenhouse at the Galileo School, I did do things differently. And so because I had a room to start plants and I could grow 2,000 tomato plants and all the others, I did do a lot more transplanting when I had the greenhouse there. So it is entirely feasible that that will influence what I'm doing here. One of the biggest issues I have with the plants in my region of Colorado is everything needs to be hardened off. Plants in my region have to be hardened off in spring. My nights get so cool in spring, and my days are already so hot in spring, that anything I grow indoors, if I put it directly into my garden, it's most likely to die within a week. So I have to spend at least a week hardening off all of my plants. So when it comes to the squashes and the melons and the cucumbers, those type of small leafy vining plants, if I grow them indoors and then want to transplant them into my garden, well, a week of their life at a very small seedling stage is hardening off, so that by the time I put them into my garden, they can handle my extreme conditions that we have here in Colorado. That's a big reason why direct sowing works better for me, because the plant starts growing, it's immediately exposed to the conditions, it acclimates immediately, and there's no issues. So that's a big reason. Now with my greenhouse, I should be able to start growing indoors, move the plants out to the greenhouse, and now the greenhouse is an intermediate phase for a lot of those plants that I can allow those plants to continue to grow, and at the same time they're gradually being hardened off to my outdoor conditions, and then I put them into the ground. So you've actually focused on a pretty interesting aspect of gardening, and it involves your individual garden conditions and how you are putting seeds and transplants into ground. And a greenhouse really can modify that. So I know you are much more expert than a lot of gardeners when it comes to greenhouse growing. So I appreciate your interest in that idea. Okay, let's see. So Lisa Potter, thank you for that suggestion to green leaf gardening. Just jump in and learn as you go. Absolutely. Watch Gardener Scott, Simplified Gardening, and many others. So Simplified Gardening is another great channel. Tony O'Neill in Wales, and In the Garden with Eli and Kate in Scotland. A lot of my favorite channels are in the UK. And me, and you'll come across a lot of other, favorite channels. But when it comes to gardening, yeah, just jump in. And so especially if you are new to gardening, get a catalog. That's why I wanted to talk about this today. Look at the options out there and just jump in. I don't remember what my first catalog was, but I remember looking at the first catalog and just being amazed at what was out there. Just the varieties. I had no clue what they all meant, but I just got some seeds and started growing, and 30 years later, I kind of know what I'm doing. That's the way to get into gardening. And so some of the other catalogs, I talked about the Seed Savers Exchange and the Fedco, Baker Creek. Botanical Interests are another company that I really like to get the seed company from. Let's see, I've got Heritage Farm, I've got Norse. This is their new catalog. These are all companies that I've ordered from. Seeds and Such. This is a smaller catalog, and I know with the green screen, the picture isn't always coming through. Oh, here we go. We were talking High Mowing. Here's the High Mowing Organic Seeds catalog, and a nice big thick catalog with a lot of stuff, a lot of good pictures, a lot of good information. What's this other one that I have down here? Oh, Vermont Bean Seed Company, and then Jung Seeds. And this is last year's catalog. I don't have the new one yet. But these are just a fraction of the seeds I get, or the seed catalogs that I get, because I just love getting seed catalogs and trying to figure out what I'm going to grow for each year. Now, this year, I'm really going to try hard to not order a whole bunch of seeds. But I've been in discussions with Pepper Joe's, and Pepper Joe's has some crazy hot pepper seeds. And I've mentioned this in recent weeks that I want to grow a lot of hot pepper seeds. And so I'm going to be getting some pepper seeds. Same thing with a lot of those other varieties that right now I'm not planning on spending a lot of money on seeds. But you know, those of us that have gardened for a while, it's an addiction. It's just one of those things that we have to try something new. We have to get new seeds, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to try to minimize it because I still have hundreds of seed back. Last year when I did the reviews of different survival seed packets, particularly with the Survival Garden Seeds company, and I still have hundreds of seed packets, not just from last year, but from the years before as well. That's why I keep enlarging my garden, just to have more space to grow more varieties of all these seeds I have. So be careful, because you can get really into that whirlwind of seed procurement and seed germination and seed growing. But I love it, as you probably do too. But it begins with the catalogs. In most cases, and the reason I like the catalogs, especially if you can find a local company, especially if it's a family-owned company, I love supporting those kinds of businesses. If you go to the store, the big box store is going to have the seed racks. You may already have them. It's still too early in my area. But for some of you, you probably already have the seed racks starting to appear in your stores. They're all the same varieties. I bet you that if I look at the seed rack that is in my store here in Colorado and compare it to your seed rack that might be in Vermont or Connecticut or even Florida, there's going to be a lot of similarities. It's the same big company selling the same seeds nationally throughout the United States. And so we're losing that difference that we used to have in how we would garden. And we're now all gardening the same thing. That's why the Seed Savers Exchange organization, I think, is so great, because they want that variety. They want that diversity of plants. You should be growing different plants in Vermont than I'm growing in Colorado. And I should be growing different plants in Colorado than what you might be growing in San Diego. But what happens is we all grow the same type of tomatoes. We all grow the same type of beets. We all grow the same type of carrots. And I really think getting that diversity is important for all of us, for the future. And that's where the seed catalogs come in, because there are varieties in a seed catalog that you will never see in a store on the rack that comes out in springtime. So think about that. Another big reason I think that catalogs are great, because you can pick out some of those unique varieties and then plan them for your garden, because it's new and it is unique and it is diverse. So keep going. Tell me what other catalogs you'd like to have. Two Gal says, every year my garden gets more beds and now a new no-dig area. More seeds means more space. Absolutely. And if you love to garden, and I like the building of the garden as much as I like the actual gardening, then more seeds just means more reason to get out there and do it at home. With Cherie says, I can't resist the new varieties, expanding the garden and getting a bigger greenhouse to accommodate. I'm sure at some point I'll calm down. Well, from experience, I'm older than most and I haven't calmed down yet. So keep after it. Okay, Rick says seed companies may buy the same seeds from the same seed farmers. Yeah, that's a good point as well. And I know that is happening here in the United States, and it's actually happening in other places around the world. Talking to the people at Baker's Creek as to their sources, some of these companies get so big that they may get the entire seed crop from some of these smaller producers. But also, a lot of these seed producers are producing so much seed that a single company can't buy all of their crop. And so that could be some big business. That these seed companies are producing seed, and then you're exactly right. They're selling them to a number of companies. And so I'm not positive about this, but so two things. First off, if you look at some of the companies out there and smaller companies, and they're selling the really cheap seeds, the 99-cent, the $1.99 a packet kind of seeds. From what I've been able to figure out, a lot of those companies that are very small, they're usually a name brand. A lot of them are associated with YouTube gardeners. They're getting all their seed from the same source. And so it may be a different name on the packet, but it's essentially the same seed. There's also some of the big companies that if you check the address of the catalog, you'll note that they're completely different companies. They all have the same address. And so one of the very first videos I did 5 or 6 years ago now, I talk about that, where I compare seed catalogs and I point out, I think 4 or 5 different catalogs from different companies that all have the same address. So yeah, they're definitely selling the same seed. It's just different companies with different names on the packets. Yet another reason why I like to support the smaller growers that I know are growing their seeds and then selling them to us. And I support that kind of operation at every opportunity. So, okay, let's see what else we have. Shandy's Garden says that needs to be on a shirt. What was Jay saying on a shirt? I'll have to look back and see what you were talking about, because I'm always looking for good ideas with shirts. So, Ultimate Gardening, nice to have you here today. I'm remodeling my garden and I have many seeds that I have that were sent to me that I need to start. I'm growing more veggies now. Good for you. And Ultimate Gardening is another great channel you should consider checking out. To see enthusiasm in the garden, you'll find that at the Ultimate Gardening channel. Let me talk real quickly. This is my garden this morning, and just wanted to show you that I got all my beds cleaned up. They're ready to go. I actually have garlic planted in this bed, and then the second bed, 2 full beds of garlic. Over 200 garlic cloves I put in the ground this year. So as I'm moving forward with my planning, even though I've got a ton of seeds and I'm looking at more seeds in all these catalogs, I'm going to try to focus more and more on what I'm growing this year. So I have 2 beds of garlic. I'm planning to do at least 2, probably 3 beds of nothing but peppers. I'm gonna do a couple beds with not as many squashes. I may just focus on like zucchini and delicata squash this year. I'm not sure if I'm gonna grow yellow squash. I've grown yellow squash for years and years and years. I'm not sure if I'm gonna grow it this year. I'm gonna try to focus a little bit more on what it is I'm growing, and a big part of that is to save the seed so that I can continue moving forward with those seeds. And as I progress to next year, same kind of thing. I'm going to grow fewer and fewer varieties so that I don't have to worry about the cross-pollination, and then I can save the seed. But I still want to, having discovered the delicata squash, if you don't try something new, then you won't discover that crop that you want to grow in the years ahead. If you keep growing the same things over and over again, nothing wrong with that, but you may miss out on an opportunity. I like the Detroit dark red beet, but I like the golden beet better. I wouldn't have known that without trying something new. So my approach this year is going to be a little bit different, but you can see, all the trees have lost their leaves and all the plants are dying or already dead as far as the general landscape plants. This was this morning. Today's the last day, like I mentioned, that we're going to be above freezing for a while. So I thought I'd go out there. I just rushed out real quickly to take a picture, and my neighbor yelled at me because I wasn't wearing a jacket. It was warm enough that I didn't need a jacket this morning because when I went out, it was actually right at freezing. And so with the sun up and no wind and the dry air of Colorado, that was actually halfway comfortable. So I was outside taking pictures and roaming through my garden, but today's the warmest day we're going to have for a while. So this is what my garden looks like right now. Send me pictures of what your garden looks like right now, even if there's nothing growing in it. Gardener Scott at gardenerscott.com. Go ahead and send me your pictures and let me know specifically that it's for the intent of showing it to people, and give me your permission and I'll do it. I get pictures a lot from different people, and I love your gardens, but if you're sending it to me with the intent that you want me to show it as a background, unless you specifically say that, I just think it's an email between you and me, and that's how I treat it. So my winter pictures from other gardens is extremely low, pretty much nothing right now. So I need your pictures if we're going to show something in the background. Berghaus, hey to you. Greetings in Slovenia with the first snow this winter season. Nice to have you here today. And first snow in Slovenia. That's incredible. So nice to have you here. Isn't it fantastic that we can go around and have all the different places and think about the snows. It's not going to be our first snow. We have yet to have a heavy snow. I think we've had snow 3 times. Very, very light. The storm that's rolling through the country is dropping 4 and 5 feet of snow in the Sierra Nevada mountains. It's going to drop a few feet of snow when it hits the Rockies near me, but it's going too far north. So I'm going to get just a light dusting of snow. So your first snow of the season, I hope it's a good one. I hope it's something that you have been looking forward to. And I love the snows of the season, especially this time of year. So Two Gals is wondering, do I have more space for a bed? So absolutely. So this is a view of my garden. And so you can't see some of the beds. I don't show everything in my videos, but this area right here, I did a video this last year. This whole area is covered with leaves and grass for the purpose of building up the soil. And so this whole area back here, in 2 years, I'm on a long plan, 2 years, there's gonna be a whole bunch of new beds in this area back here. And in the far back, in this area, you can see there's a tree there that's dead that I need to cut down. And so that whole area back there, I've got space to put more beds in. And then same thing in the way far back over here, I actually put some raspberry plants in this back corner this year. So luckily, my landscape is big enough that I do have more space for beds. What I'm running out of is time to handle all of the plants that are growing in all of those beds. So it is a challenge to figure out what I have, what I'm going to do, and what I'm going to do next, and make sure I have the time to adequately support all of that. Glenn Davies wondering, do I overwinter peppers due to my short growing season? So I haven't. Now, I've got a grow tent now that I'm starting to experiment with. And as I mentioned in my first grow tent video a couple months ago, one of the reasons I have a grow tent is to grow peppers and tomatoes over the course of the winter. So I'm not doing it now because I got the grow tent too late. But I am planning next year to start overwintering peppers using the grow tent as my primary location. That's my plan right now. And so we'll see as I learn more about it and continue formalizing that process. I expect to overwinter peppers in the future. I've had great success with peppers by starting them from seed indoors, going through the whole hardening off process, and then putting the plants into my garden. And so even though my season is so short, I grow all my own plants. I just make sure that the soil temperature is right and they give me a good harvest. I just had a great week. I just finished a pepper hot sauce video that I've been working on for months. I'm not going to release it until next year, but I made some incredibly delicious hot pepper sauce from the peppers that I grew this year. So I can still grow peppers and allow them to reach the point of full maturity, full red hot peppers before my season is over. I just have to select the varieties that work best for me. And so like with Pepper Joe's this year, I'll be growing some varieties that take longer, but I'll be doing those in my greenhouse. The next part of that process of growing peppers is to overwinter those plants, to take some of those plants that I really like, bring them indoors, put them into my grow tent, keep them going over the course of the winter, and then put them out in the garden as a second year plant, stronger, bigger, better. So yeah, definitely looking at that. I'll also experiment a little bit more So overwintering kind of encompasses a couple of different approaches. One is to keep the plant actively growing, and the other is to allow the plant to effectively become dormant. It's not totally dormant, but you do a really severe pruning of it, and you keep it in a cool location so that it's not actively growing. And I'm going to be doing both of those things this next year. That's in my plan. So good question. I'm not actively doing it now, but I am looking to add that to my bag of tricks for next year. So, and of course, you'll see videos on it because that's just what I do. So Nick from Yuma, new member to the channel. Nice to have you here as well. That's always nice as a garden support member. So thank you so much. So let's see what else we have. Rick is wondering, planning what to freeze dry. Oh, absolutely. And so I've been freeze drying a ton of stuff. Now, as to the videos I'm making, I don't want to become a freeze drying channel. So I've freeze dried my chili. I've freeze dried bananas. I've freeze dried ice cream sandwiches, which are really good. I've freeze dried eggnog. I've freeze dried ice cream. I've freeze dried pudding. I've been freeze drying a whole ton of stuff, but I'm not doing videos on that because this isn't a freeze drying channel. But the freeze drying is a lot of fun, and I'm really enjoying it. The videos that I will be doing are like the video I did. In fact, this morning, I just had some of my zucchini bread. So the zucchinis I harvested back in September, I freeze dried, and then I used that shredded freeze dried zucchini to make zucchini bread. And then I ate some of that bread, and then I froze some of that bread. And so now here it is, the middle of December, and I'm still eating zucchini bread from the plants I grew in the summer because I freeze dried and then made bread and then froze the bread. So the freeze drying is just really cool. And I talked about that in that most recent video that I did on freeze drying zucchini. So yeah, absolutely, I'm planning. In fact, it's interesting you ask that, because as we talk about choosing the varieties and choosing the plants, using the catalogs, that is definitely on my mind as I'm choosing what to grow for next year. How can I bring it into my freeze dryer and preserve it as well? So good question. And yes, absolutely. That is definitely something that's on my mind, because the freeze dryer really is a pretty cool tool. And, as always, I've got the link to the Harvest Dried Freeze Dryer in the description below, because that's the company you buy from here in the States, at least. And I'm not sure whether they ship or if they sell in other countries, but it's incredible. I'm having a lot of fun with that freeze dryer. Yankee Sister Homestead, so nice to see you here today. Another great live. Thank you so much for that. And I like visiting with you as well every Monday. So thank you for that super chat. It's always nice to see you here. And it's one of those things that it's the old, and I don't mean old from an age perspective, because Yankee Sister Homestead has had a pretty interesting career with Army and hospitals and fun things like that. But those of us that are old of age may also be old viewers of YouTube channels when it comes to the Gardener Scott channel. So when I say thanks to all the old people watching today, I mean old because we've been doing this live stream for a couple years now, not necessarily age. So that's why it's so great to see some of you young members, regardless of whatever your age happens to be, you're at least sharing with us this gardening experience, which is always a lot of fun to see the new friends, because there's a lot of us that have been here almost from the beginning. Jay and Heidi have been here for years, as have many of you. So always nice to share this time on our Mondays or Tuesdays if you're in New Zealand or Australia. Rudimental gardening. When selecting seed varieties, I find that hybrid varieties do much better in my region than heirloom varieties. They seem to handle the high temperatures better with better harvest. That's an excellent point. And so I love growing heirloom plants because I like the idea of keeping old varieties alive and sharing and not becoming focused on just a handful of varieties. But you're exactly right. I still grow a lot of hybrids, and I've talked about this in a couple videos this year. Hybrid seeds are usually developed because they have particular aspects to them, like they can handle the weather conditions, or they can handle the soil type, or they're resistant to particular diseases. So there are wonderful reasons to grow hybrids. And yes, depending on wherever you happen to live around this world, you may find that the varieties that do best are hybrid varieties. The tomato varieties that I like are specific to my zone. So for instance, the Black Creme is a tomato that comes from the Crimean region, and that matches my climate and my growing conditions. And so while it's an heirloom that I've found that matches well with my region, I've tried a whole bunch of heirloom tomatoes over the years that didn't do well. There are a lot of hybrids that do well from my experience. So especially in challenging environments like Colorado, it's often easier to have success by getting those hybrid varieties. Absolutely, absolutely. But once you achieve that success, that's when I encourage that you explore to see what else is out there and try to put some of that diversity into your garden, if you so choose. But you're exactly right. And I completely agree with you that some of my most successful plants are hybrids. And that's just the way it is, because they're growing in an environment that matches their hybridization and my particular soil and weather and climate. So whatever's working best for you. But again, when I can find an open pollinated plant, most likely an heirloom, that does well in my garden, that's when I want to save the seeds, and that's when I want to keep it going. The biggest problem with a hybrid is you can't save that seed and expect it to bear true to the parent. So when you find that hybrid seed that you like, you get the packet with a whole bunch of seeds and then save those seeds and grow it over the course of 3 or 4 years, and then you have to buy more seeds and keep the process going. Whereas the heirloom and open pollinated plants, you can save the seed. And that's where I'm really focused for my future, is trying to find those best varieties that acclimate well with my garden and then move forward with it. But I'll be trying new hybrids this year. Absolutely, no doubt of that. You can expect it. And you can also expect that you're going to have some information in videos. Janny, going to dinner. Thanks for joining us today. You have a nice day as well. Hope you have a nice dinner. Hope, all of us, it's getting to that point. The preserving, I've been doing a lot more videos and more stress about the importance of preserving your harvest, which is why it's so great in the middle of December that I can enjoy zucchini bread with zucchinis from my own garden. So I hope you can all think about those kind of aspects in your planning for the future as you're looking through the catalogs. Think about preserving. And that's one of the things that I look for when I read the catalogs, is some of the better catalogs, the ones that have that extra information, will talk about preserving and how you can use. That's one reason I like Fedco, because I'm growing a number of apple trees that I got from Fedco for the purpose of making apple cider at some point in the future. And Fedco is awesome in their catalog where they talk about the apples and what they taste like. And they specify this would be a good apple for making cider. And there are a lot of other catalogs that bring those type of subjects into the information. This is a good peach to make a pie. This is a good apple to juice. This is a good apple to bake with. So look for those kind of those catalogs that can give you an idea of how you're going to use the information as you move forward with it. At home with Cherie, I've enjoyed my freeze dryer, and also I'm planning some of my garden growing bases on what I want to freeze dry a lot of. Excellent. So, the freeze dryer is a big investment, but it really is incredible when you start figuring out how you can use it. And encourage you, like I talked about in that first video I did about the freeze dryer, it took me years of planning to finally get to the point that I've got my own freeze dryer. And so start planning for it if it's something that you want to have in your repertoire. Shandy's Garden, yeah, we're part of the OG Old Gardeners or original group. That's funny. So thanks so much for that. Nick from Yuma, the gardening community is nicest and most supportive of any on YouTube. Absolutely. I watch a lot of videos, not just gardening. I'll talk about that here in just a second. And I rarely deal with trolls, and I rarely have those negative comments. This week I had one, and it was from a person that I don't recognize the name, and they criticized my garden because my tomato branches looked ugly because they were growing too far outside the trellis. Really? Well, I don't even consider that a troll. I just think of that as a person that doesn't know enough about gardening to realize that it doesn't have to look pretty all the time to be a successful garden. Doesn't matter. That's the only negative comment I've gotten this year. And as you might guess, I get a lot of comments over the course of a week. So the community is incredible across the board with all the channels that I've seen, being supportive, being helpful. And I completely agree that it's one of those things that the gardening community, I just think we're better people. We're nicer people. We have more patience. And that's important in our world to start thinking about that. But there's more to it than that. And that's what I wanted to talk today about with the Bowtie Life, who had a recent video talking about hobbies other than gardening. And that really took me aback because I have so much of my focus. Now, granted, it's what I'm doing a lot of: planning videos, writing the videos, filming the videos, editing the videos, uploading the videos, and making more videos, and doing the gardening, and doing the planning, and doing the seeds, and all the rest of it. So much of my life really is focused on gardening. But speaking from experience, it shouldn't be your whole life. You should have hobbies outside gardening. So whether it's model trains or woodworking or whatever the other thing happens to be, do try to devote attention to those other things as well. One of my hobbies is just making stuff. I've got my saw and my drill and all my tools, and I like to build stuff. Well, that's one reason why I built my own raised beds. And there's lots of other things that I like to make to use in the garden. Just dibble sticks and little things like that, that because I've got some woodworking skills, I don't even think twice about it. When it's time to build a big enclosed area with this metal and all the wood, I didn't even think twice about it because I have those skills, because that's one of my hobbies, is making things with the tools that I have. You can incorporate it into gardening in many many opportunities that you have, depending on what the hobbies happen to be. If they work in conjunction like that, awesome. But if it's completely different, if it is not just gardening and it's something that's totally unrelated, go for it. Make sure you devote enough attention to that as well. And a big reason why I wanted to talk about this, particularly over the holidays, which for many people actually ends up being a depressing time of year, gardeners suffer a lot of depression over winter because our whole focus is on gardening. And then when you have days like this where it's freezing and nothing is growing and you really can't do anything outside because the ground is frozen, if that's all you're focused on, it's easy to get depressed. It's easy to reach that point that you're just not enjoying your life. Get another hobby. Find something else to do. I like cooking. I like baking. I like doing those kind of things, especially when I can do it with my own harvest that I've preserved one way or another. Again, a way to incorporate some of your interests. But think about that, especially if you associate yourself as a gardener over a lot of those other activities, find something else that's new. I'm looking to, just got a catalog from one of our local colleges, and I'm thinking of doing some painting and drawing classes this next year. I've never really done that. I'm not a painter. I'm not a drawer. But as my garden starts getting to the point where I've got my gazebo and my sitting space and my paths and all the flowers and all the things that continue to evolve in my garden, I'd love to be out and sketch what's happening in the garden. I've never done that before. So for me, that would be a new hobby. And it actually sounds pretty interesting to me to try that new thing. Still, because gardening is a primary factor in my life, it's tied to gardening, but it is different. And so thank you to Bowtie Life to get me thinking outside the gardening box and start thinking about some of those other hobbies that I'm already doing, maybe not enough of, but also some of those other interests that could become a full-time hobby in some other time, especially when the garden is not actively growing and I'm looking for something to stay active with. So think about that. What kind of hobbies are you doing and want to do and maybe haven't thought about doing, but it's suddenly entering your radar as to what you could be doing? And it's one of those things, like Jen's saying, I started embroidering last year. When I can't grow plants, I embroider them on cloth. There you go. Perfect example. I really appreciate that. Coastal crocus bird watchers. Excellent. I did a lot of that in my last house, and I am not doing as much as I wish I would be doing. Great example, bird watching. Carla loves drawing what I see in the garden. That's fantastic. And Britt Lee is a bird watcher at all. Bohemian Herbology, cold process soap maker. There you go. My wife, both the hot process and cold process, a lot of soap making. So wonderful opportunities. And I actually would grow lavender for my wife to use in her soap. So there's lots of ways we can incorporate a lot of these fun things. Sunset Gazing is doing candle making. Lisa Potter's got worm farming. That's fantastic. And Yankee Sista is experimenting with quilting. Fantastic. So think about those kind of things as you move forward into your next gardening season, whatever it happens to be. What are you going to do in the time that you're not actively gardening, and make it useful for you and, of course, for all those around you. Hey, guess what? I'm going to be back next week. I'll be back next Monday or Tuesday in New Zealand and Australia, and we'll do this all over again. I hope you're here to join me. Thank you so much for your time and your energy and just being a positive gardener from wherever you are in the world. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.